Independence Day 2025 will go down as one of the worst flooding disasters in American history. People traveling from around Texas and the region to vacation and celebrate America's independence on the Guadalupe River would wake up to tragedy. More than 100 people would lose their life and many more remain missing. In this video, we'll talk about what happened and the circumstances that caused this flood. Along with factors that make this river so dangerous, was cloud seeding a factor in this flood? And rescue and recovery, it seems so slow. Plus key takeaways and ideas on how we make sure a disaster like this does not happen again. Hi everyone, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Brad Sowder. I'm a TV meteorologist in San Antonio, Texas, covering just about all of South Texas, including the Hill Country, Kerrville, Kerr County, the Guadalupe River. I was working all of, what was just a week ago, last week, covering the storms, the rain, forecasting the event, knowing a flood was possible and flood watches that would be issued, flood warnings that then came, and then the flood emergency. So what happened? Why were people caught off guard? Well, first of all, this was a huge flood. Obviously, you've seen the video, the pictures, the scary scenes. 5 to 12 inches of rain fell in the headwaters of the Guadalupe River, right where it's most critical, most crucial for flooding. It was a record flood, one that now we know surpassed the 1932 record flood event. People call it a 1 in a 100-year flood. What does that mean? Well, it basically means you have a 1% chance in any given year to have a flood of that magnitude. July 3rd into July 4th, people came from all over the region. They weren't thinking about floods. They weren't thinking about anything but getting away from their job, the noise, the bills, turning their phone off, unplug. Why do you go camping? Why do you leave the city? You're wanting something different. You're wanting something that's less noisy. So they went out to the river and they may have turned their phone off, or even if they were able to get warnings, they wouldn't have received them because cell phone service is terrible there. This flood happened at the perfect time for a perfect disaster. It came on a night where more people were on the river than they would have ever been on any other night in the calendar year. It's very different in the Hill Country. You have something called the Balcones Escarpment. It's limestone. There's very shallow soil, if any soil at all. And when it rains, very little water is able to soak in and drip down. It's basically like a giant parking lot. If you've ever spilled water, dumped out a bucket of soapy shampoo water from washing your car in your driveway, it quickly runs away. So imagine that in a giant rainstorm where it rains a foot. The rivers are going to swell. There's only one way out of there for all of the water to go. If it doesn't drip down into the ground, it goes into the Guadalupe River. Another reason why the river is so dangerous is something called low head dams. These are old dams to pond up the river to make a recreation destination, maybe where a camp is. Water may trickle over top of the dam or have a couple pipes that it runs through, but typically it doesn't go over, not until a flood. And you've seen those large waves, those large what are called hydraulic jumps. In a video like this, one of those locations in Kerrville, you can see the water pouring over top of this dam and there's no way out. Look at all the debris that's in there being churned. The strongest swimmers in the world, caught in that, cannot get out. There are many of these locations all up and down the Guadalupe River. With this event, the rescue and recovery seems so slow. So many missing, the numbers barely ticking up. The wanting to reunite people with their loved ones, even regardless of the outcome. And I think so many people know now, hope is fading for the outcome that they want. There are hundreds of certified rescue crews up and down the Guadalupe River with all of the latest and greatest equipment and technologies, searching for what remains. It's not easy. With so many missing, you have to ask yourself, why aren't they finding these people? Well, you have to remember the river hasn't flooded like this in almost 100 years. Lots of trees broke, lots of debris. It's piled up on top of a car. Look at this image of this vehicle. There's a roadway on top of this vehicle. So in order to get into this car to make sure somebody's not in there, you have to first remove that very heavy construction genie, weighs many tons. You then have to remove the broken trees. Then you have to remove the asphalt and the cement from a parking lot or a roadway. And then all of the gravel and sand, thousands of pounds of that, washing all the way into the car, all the way up to the ceiling. It would take someone a day, or take a crew a day, just to search this vehicle to make sure nobody's inside, only to find they're not, or they are. And there are many, many cars just like this, and many, many piles of debris just like this. The numbers of missing seem dramatic. How do we have so many missing, and why aren't they finding them? The good news is, it's possible those numbers are wrong, that they could be skewed. We remember back to the flood of Helene just last September in North Carolina, specifically western North Carolina in Asheville. The numbers of missing were in the hundreds, only to find that the final death toll was around 100. So why so many missing? Well, this flood is similar to that area because it was a vacation area that was hit so hard. Lake Lure, Chimney Rock, Bat Cave, North Carolina, mostly tourist destinations. And a lot of the people that came to the Guadalupe for Independence Day were tourists, were campers, were those trying to get away. Families that had loved ones that went to Texas, to the Guadalupe, or to nearby, couldn't get a hold of their loved one the next day or the couple days afterwards. They may have lost their phone. Cell phone signal is bad, and it's a disaster. It might be very difficult to get a hold of people in that certain circumstance, so they reported them missing. Well, they happened to show back home, but with all life coming back into play, they didn't call to report them found, that they actually were not missing. So some of those could be the people. The overprotective grandmother that knew the family was going on a Texas vacation. Maybe she's not in touch with them very often. Maybe they went to Dallas, nowhere near the flood. She hasn't heard from them. She reports them missing, only to not even remember she reported them missing. You could see how that could happen. And so those are numbers that won't go known until long after, and we realize these people aren't missing at all. The hope would be that a lot of those are that way. There's actually a company in a community I used to live in, or a town I used to live in Colorado, named Grand Junction, Colorado. In fact, here's an image of a weird-looking boat that they make. They call it the Creature Craft, but that is designed to be able to go into these hydraulic jumps and to pull people out. It can roll, it can flip, it can bounce, you can put a motor on it, and still it's the only boat I've ever seen that can rescue people. So there is technology for this, but not everybody has a custom boat that looks like this. And of course, in the middle of the night, they're not getting into boats. People are looking for many other explanations to this. Why did this river rise so fast? Maybe there was something else at play. A lot of folks are learning about cloud seeding. It's real. Cloud seeding is something that happens, but not like this. Let me explain. Cloud seeding company will fly drones or aircraft, helicopters, or even place devices on top of high mountains and spray silver iodide, fine particles of silver iodide, into a cloud that is already there. The idea is that the moisture in the cloud will cling to these silver iodide particles and make condensation nuclei, as it's called, raindrops or snowflakes or ice crystals, a way to take the moisture that's there, to get it to cling to something and to fall, to enhance precipitation. Now, there are cloud seeding companies in the state of Texas, but they were not operating on July 4th. In fact, they report it was many days back in June, early June, that they were operating last. And silver iodide from this does not stick around in the cloud that long. Hours, maybe at most a day, but certainly not days or weeks to influence the flooding disaster in this. Plus, you have to remember as well, this was a holiday weekend. People are on holiday. They're not actively cloud seeding. They're already off themselves. So various reasons why cloud seeding was not a factor. And it wouldn't even be known if it was. There's plenty of research that suggests that we don't even really know how effective cloud seeding is. We know it's some effective, but to the extent of just how much That's hard to know because how much rain would fall if you didn't put silver iodide in the cloud? How much snow would fall if you hadn't seeded that cloud? That's hard to know. It makes sense scientifically that that would happen, but it's certainly unknown whether or not it actually works as well as people would like. So where do we go from here? How do we fix this to make sure it doesn't happen again? We now know how dangerous these rivers are. For a lot of you, you're realizing why this area is called Flash Flood Alley. There's nowhere else like it in the United States. You might find streams and rivers like this in Utah or Arizona, maybe up into South Dakota in the Badlands. But the access to moisture, the Gulf of Mexico, is much closer to this region, so it's much more susceptible to these high precipitation events. Lots of research being done on super high precipitation events out of Norman, Oklahoma, the National Weather Service, the National Severe Storms Laboratory there, doing a lot of research and finding out how can we better forecast events like this. So that's one element. Of course, obviously, having a better forecast and knowing exactly where the events are going to be, but I would argue this event was pretty well forecast, but didn't get to people's hands, into their minds to know that this is a real risk. So the forecast can be great, but if people don't know the forecast, it's no good at all. So if we don't get the forecast, maybe they can at least get the warning. In that area we talked about earlier that phones don't work and that campers, rightfully so, disconnect, they unplug from reality to have peace and quiet. I get that. Some have discussed an early warning system, a flood warning siren on the river. It could have saved lives, and in my opinion, I think it very well could. It has been proposed before, it was voted down. Anytime spending public money can be very difficult. After an event such as this would be the time to do it, because folks are wanting to change that. However, we need a fail-safe solution, a solution that doesn't involve human error. Somebody still has to trigger these warnings, and so many times, too many warnings result in false alarms. And people don't heed the warnings because they've heard them so many times before. EAS warnings are very effective, but they sound too many times. You've heard that sound on your phone way too many times. A flash flood emergency, a tornado emergency, should not sound like an Amber Alert. If you're sleeping in the middle of the night and your phone goes off for an Amber Alert, there's not much you're able to do because you're in bed and you're sleeping. A lot of people mute those sounds. But when they mute that sound, they're also muting the flash flood emergency, the tornado emergency that affects not just one life, but hundreds, if not thousands. And that's why we have to be careful about desensitizing people to warning sirens on a river. They can't sound too many times. We can't allow people to become desensitized to them. If it rains a little bit, we can't sound the alarm. You would have to sound it when real lives are at risk. It goes off too many times, people will ignore it. Potentially another way to slow down the river to allow it not to flood to this extent, this fast, now will still flood, is to divert some of the waters into fields and areas that slow down the flow of water so it doesn't all come down the river the same time. Purposefully flooding fields, agricultural lands where people are not in order to slow down the flood. The water will still have an opportunity to go downstream, but it won't go down all at the same time, so the river rises slower, giving people an opportunity to evacuate. People are looking for solutions to the disaster. But there will be another disaster coming that we're not ready for, and we'll also have a plan for that. But this disaster of this river, something like it will happen again. At least the water will rise up to this level once again. We have to make sure we're ready and that time doesn't allow us to forget.